Hello and welcome to today's webinar on diversity and inclusion, the secret sauce. Today we're going to discover and cover why diversity and inclusion remains on top of everybody's to-do list, what inclusion feels like and why it matters, and the importance of HR in the diversity and inclusion journey. I'm thrilled to be joined by Dana James Edwards of Diversity Dana. She's an equity, diversity and inclusion specialist working with both SME and corporate clients to ensure their workforce is reflective of the world and that everyone feels welcomed and valued. Today's session will be recorded and sent to you in the next few days. Do feel free to ask questions as we're going along in the chat box, and there'll be time for a live Q&A session at the end as well. So welcome, Dana. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you so much. I am pleased to be here at my first HRHuddle. How exciting is that?
Great. So, Dana, I wanted to kind of kick off with asking, how did you get into this field of work?
Oh, this is a good story. I like this one. So I am originally from Trinidad in the Caribbean. It's a very, very tiny island, which is not Jamaica, okay? Two separate things, okay, two separate islands. And I moved to the UK after I completed my degree at home and 1 year on a management trainee program. I, in all of my bravery, just decided to move here, did not know anyone at all, just moved.
Wow.
And
brave.
For the first time in my life, I felt what it was to be a minority. And to have that happen to you when you're already fully formed is a completely different experience, I think. For 24 years of my life, I was in the majority position, but also in a position of privilege within the majority. And to have that just pulled out from under you so unexpectedly, I think really fundamentally shifts who you are. And that's what happened for me. So when I moved to the UK, I joined a big four firm in London City, and I joined a technology stream. So I was a double minority, right? Because women in tech in those days were rare things, rarer than they are right now. And I think that in itself was a culture shock, because in some ways it mattered more that I was a woman than that I was Black. And so that in itself was really eye-opening. And I think when I think back to that time, there were so many things about me that were really similar to the other people who were hired at the firm. Like if you looked at a group of people, the firm definitely had a type, right? You could pick them out. So people of a certain social class and educational background, very well traveled, we all expressed ourselves in similar ways. But at the same time, I was different. And honestly, I really didn't feel like I belonged. And I started thinking, how can I change things so that other Danas felt more included when they joined? And it really started there. So about employee groups, like for the Caribbean people, but also women in technology, that sort of thing. And then also, as that was all happening, one day I got lost in London City, and I was getting lost in London City all the time because Google Maps wasn't what it was in those days. You still had to do the whole A to Z thing. Remember that? Oh my God, it was awful. Right. So I got lost really close to the office, actually, coming back from a client. And I ended up at a school. And let's say the firm was maybe 4 streets away from this firm. And we were in a really poor, deprived area. And something about that stood out for me as well, because there we are swanning around in our Black cabs and our expense accounts and in the pub, and literally 3-4 streets away, there is some deprivation and poverty. And we're so close to that school, but it struck me that it was really unlikely that anyone from there would come and work at the firm just because of who we are. So I started to think about that as well. And we launched the secondary school mentoring scheme. And I was doing all of this while working my client work. And so the day did come when the firm got to where I was and said, would you like to come and join this work? And that is literally where this started. I don't know if anyone goes to school thinking I'm going to be a D&I specialist when I grow up. Well, maybe they do now.
Maybe they do now.
In those days, it wasn't a thing, but that was a really exciting time to join D&I because I feel like mistakes were allowed then because we were all just figuring it out all together and muddling our way through as we went along. And also it wasn't really formed truly as a concept in the way that it is now. So being able to see how the space has evolved and how things has changed has been really interesting, and I think affects my approach to the work in general.
Fabulous. So as you were talking, I heard you saying that you didn't feel like you belonged. So what does belonging feel like?
That is an excellent question. I maybe, to answer it, will tell you some stories, give you some examples so that you will understand what I mean when I say I didn't belong. So there was this weekend that I went to a wedding. I was a bridesmaid in a wedding. And so, got all fancy over the weekend. And then when I came to work on Monday, I got so many compliments from my team about my hair, because I was having my natural hair at work. And then for the wedding, I straightened it out and whatever to match the other bridesmaids. But it wasn't like, Dana, you look so lovely today. It was, Dana, wow, you look so professional today.
Oh,
exactly my point. And in that moment, I kind of realized for the first time that my natural hair, who I was, my nature was seen as unprofessional. And I don't think that I realized it truly until that moment. Also, just small things. So I am not, and was not in those days, a big drinker. Okay, maybe that's changed a little bit now, if I'm being honest.
Okay, so now you've got twins.
In those days, I really wasn't. But there is a huge pub culture in the UK, but also, I did join a graduate scheme, so what do you expect? And so there was like multiple goings to the pub every week, which was fine. But I was different because I was a newlywed. So also worth noting that I didn't join a graduate scheme party. I did join the graduate scheme because I really had only graduated a year ago, but my life looked a little bit different. And so the going out to the pub and whatever, I just wanted to go home and snuggle and watch TV and be married and all of that stuff. And I quickly realized that stuff happened at the pub. So people made connections, they got to know each other, they were choosing each other for their next jobs and whatever. And I was being left out of that. And if I wanted to be a part of that, I needed to go to the pub. And so I went to the pub. But then you have to go to the pub and there's this whole rounds thing. And there's so many people and so many rounds. And who wants to drink so many rounds? Well, I didn't at that point in time. But then if you drank something that was non-alcoholic, for example, you'd get comments back like, I don't trust someone who doesn't drink or whatever. And so the next thing you know, with the pressure of all of that, your head's in a fishbowl with 10 other people who have straws, and you're doing the do because that's what you do, even though you don't really enjoy it, right? Also small things like sometimes I would say something that was an idea or a thought I would have, and there was like this whole little banter going on, like, Dana, that's maybe how it worked in the islands, but that's not how we do things here. That kind of like a back and forthy thing that was funny, and everyone was laughing about it. But then I started realizing that I was losing my voice because I was so afraid to speak up in case I got that reaction back. The final thing I'm just going to say about not belonging is that Trinidadian people by nature are very warm, but are also very blunt. And in the UK, there is this air of politeness, especially in consulting, I think must be even worse, that covers everything. And so when I first started my career, managers would say to me, and by the way, lots of managers, because it was consulting and the jobs changed all the time, they would say to me, Dana, you might want to think about, and then say a thing. And I took that literally, like I might want to think about it, and I'd go away and I'd think about it. And if I thought it should be implemented, I would do that thing. And if it didn't, I wouldn't. Not realizing that you might want to think about means, Dana, go do that thing. So then I started to get negative feedback that I wasn't listening to feedback, but I was listening, but I thought it was an optional because of the way that it was phrased. And then in the same breath, I would get feedback that I didn't give feedback kindly enough, because I would just say the thing, right? I wouldn't say you might want to think about. I would say, just do this thing. And that wasn't an acceptable way to be. And so it felt almost like having to learn a foreign language. So I would be at home thinking about a feedback conversation that I wanted to have with someone the next day, and having to plan out how I would say that conversation against my natural way of talking, right? So it was almost like I had to translate it into the correct and appropriate language to be able to say it and learn that behavior. And I just think that while I was spending so much time and energy assimilating and learning how to be different, other people didn't have to do that.
No.
And so they had a lot of cognitive space that was freed up to be able to be themselves and do things that they wanted to do. And I had to spend a lot of time dealing with that kind of churn. It was really difficult. Also, you know, consultancy is very suited and booted, and I have a very exuberant personality. I'm not sure if you can tell. And so sometimes I would get told to, like, you know, button up a little bit and be a little bit more what they think is professional, and that in itself was difficult. And so that was me feeling like I didn't belong in that space, even though, like, if you looked at the company from the outside perspective, you might have given them a tick for inclusion and for diversity as well, because people from all over the world did work there. They had a mix of languages, they had a good balance of genders. You would probably give them a tick on diversity, and their policies and stuff were pretty explicit, maybe not followed, but explicit when it came to things that were supposed to promote inclusion. But ultimately, I didn't fit, Eloise, is what I'm saying. And so when I went to my next job that was after that one, it was a bit more different. It had more of a startup-y vibe. No suits were required. And they did not have the diversity mix at first that my initial firm had, but I felt so welcome there. I didn't have to second guess myself. I didn't have to tone down my ideas. I remember a really brilliant moment where my boss said to me, I feel like you're holding back. Tell me your craziest idea and tell me what it is, because I feel like I'm watching you self-censoring. And I told him, and he was like, yeah, that's absolutely what we're going to do. All of a sudden, my forthrightness was valued. My directness had value. And I was able to, and I know this sounds like a cliche and people argue about it all the time, but I was able to be my full self at work. I didn't have to be someone else to get ahead, and I fit. And for me, that's what it feels like.
It's amazing, isn't it? Just in different cultures, how you can have, you know, different work cultures, how you can have such a different experience. And people are putting in the chat box. I mean, Lynn was saying that, you know, she's from the West Country, and lots of her co-workers are from the North, and even she feels, you know, the difference there. So, you know, it happens everywhere. But I love the fact that you've named the session the secret sauce, Sounds really interesting. So it really made me smile. What's the name about? Because I'm sure everybody else wants to know as well.
Okay, to
Secret sauce.
answer, Eloise, I'm going to ask a question back to you.
Okay.
Do you cook?
Well, anybody who knows me will know that I'm not a very good cook. I can cook a few things.
Okay, does your cooking extend to making a sauce?
Now
Any kind of
yes,
sauce?
I can make a mean vegetable sauce for that goes over like bolognese, and it's got about 15 vegetables in, so it's my kind of go-to to make sure my children are healthy.
Okay, love it. What is in your sauce? Tell us about how you make the sauce.
Okay, well, this will show that I really am no cook. So I will roughly chop all the vegetables, and so there's butternut squash, onions, garlic, any kind of vegetable that's in the fridge. But there are there's some main ones: peppers, courgettes, spinach. So they all get roasted in the oven for a good hour, and then blended together with some tomatoes, and somehow it tastes amazing.
It sounds amazing, and I might have to try it out on my kids
Yes,
myself, right?
I would
I
definitely.
think what I love about your answer, Eloise, is that this notion that the sauce is made up of multiple things, which is what I'm driving at, right? I didn't name it the secret ingredient because that makes it sound like it's just one thing. And to be honest, this is being recorded, but you know what? I'm saying it anyway. I'm sick and tired of people thinking there is a shortcut to inclusion and belonging. And there's just one thing, one magic wand. Usually the magic wand is 2 hours of unconscious bias training, let's be honest, that's going to fix everything and make it all better and make things work. But that's not what it is, right? I said a sauce because for me, inclusion in itself and by the very nature is the coming together of things. It's about the mixing of things. And so I don't want to sit here and tell you just do this one thing and everything is going to be fine and let that be the message. I think my message is look at your combination of things. And I'm going to get really specific about some of the things that I think are really important that help shape the way an organization approaches inclusion and belonging. Because Eloise, you told us all of the things that are in the sauce. Is it possible that you could miss out some of the things and still have a good sauce?
Yeah, I always leave out the aubergine because I don't like aubergine. So I definitely leave that out. But what I would, so yes, you can. But I will get feedback from my children if it's a different color or a different texture, or if it tastes different. So, but you can, and you can swap things around.
Okay.
But there are
so
some things that you can't. There's some parts of it you can't take out.
Absolutely. That's exactly, it's almost like I paid you big money to do that reading for me, right?
To hear about my cooking skills.
There will always be some things that you could swap out and move around, etc. But there are also some things that are core. That if you miss this out, I imagine it might be the tomatoes or the garlic, for example, it's not going to be as good a sauce.
No.
And so the point of this is for me to share with you what I think are the tomatoes and the garlic, the essential things that you really need and that you should be thinking about as an organization. Right. So that's the point. That's why I called it the secret sauce, because I'm going to talk about those things. I actually, in the end, came up with 10 things. So I've been thinking about it over the last few days. I landed on 10. It seems like a magical number. I'm sure there will be things that I have forgotten. I did run it past some of my peers just to see where we landed. But for me, these are the 10. And you might not agree with me on all of them, and you might have things to add, but you know what? Isn't that the whole point of today anyway, to be able to share these things with each other, right? So keep a note, and if we get to the end and you're like, Dana, I think this is really a key one, then the next time I talk about this, I might have to extend my list to 12 things or 15 things, or how many ever we manage to come up with all together. So I'll just walk through, give some highlights, and I'm going to throw some client stories in as well, anonymously, of course, as we walk through, so I can tell you a little bit more about this. So the first one for me is about senior leadership and support and sponsorship. So in lots of the organizations I come to, stuff is happening at the grassroots level. It's happening with the staff, but senior leaders aren't really engaging as much as they should and could be. And some of that is because they're a little bit nervous. They might not know everything there is to know about D&I. It feels like cancel culture is running rampant, and they're afraid of saying the wrong thing and everyone canceling them, or for whatever reason, they're not as involved as they need to be. I think senior leadership sponsorship is really important. And I think while you might make great strides in the beginning without it, there will ultimately come a point where you can't get any further than where you are, because to be able to push the agenda, you need senior people who are aware, who have control over budgets, who have control over strategies and plans and agendas, and who are looking out further into the future, and who know things about the organization that might not be known on the grassroots level. So one of the things I do when I go into organizations is I say, look, who is your senior leadership sponsor for this work? And having a senior leadership sponsor, by the way, doesn't mean that only one person out of the entire senior leadership team is going to engage with this. No, we want them all to be engaging as much as possible, but at least there is someone making the noise for you at that level. There's someone sharing the perspective of the work in more closed door meetings. I think this is really essential. So essential, in fact, that I put it as my number one thing on the list. I think it's really important, and I think we need to see more of it. The second thing, and now the order is just, I had to put my number one thing first, but after this, all pretty even, right? So I don't know if you've noticed this trend of wanting to boost your diversity numbers. All of a sudden, everyone's thinking about it, talking about it, and they really care about the numbers and the bottom line. So how many BAME people did we recruit in the year? What's our ethnic mix looking like? What's our gender mix looking like? And especially for the reportable things, right? All of a sudden, it's feeling like a numbers game. And it's one of my least favorite things about the space at the moment. I understand the need for targets, but what I'm trying to say is that the reality is that if you bring in a whole bunch of people and they don't feel included and like they belong, you're not going to keep them. So your gains are going to be really short-lived because you're not thinking long-term and you're only thinking about the short term. So I'm saying do things internally to boost inclusion, to make people feel like they can be a part of the organization no matter who they are, and that their voices are heard before you bring in people to have an experience of alienation and otherness, right? Sometimes when I look at clients' Glassdoor profiles, you see things like, I felt like a token employee, or I felt left out, and whatever. And all of these feelings are coming from putting the cart before the horse, trying to drive up the numbers, trying to make things look really good on paper without actually doing the work. And we have to start challenging ourselves to do the work. Okay, do the work, make sure that there is space for people, that people feel really comfortable. I mean, survey your existing staff, all of that stuff. See where you are before you start just ticking and bringing in the numbers. I had a really sad moment last week where a group that I work now really closely with, they created a position especially for someone who was an ethnic minority. And last week I was called into a meeting with that person to talk about what their experience of working in that organization was like. There are some days where at the end of the day, I need an ice cream at the end of the day. That was one of those days. It was an absolutely heartbreaking conversation about the way that she felt that she was selected for her characteristic and not for what she could bring to the organization. And I think when we're running the numbers, we have to be so careful and so mindful about how we make people feel, right? Inclusion work is about how people feel at its core, and less about ticking the boxes and having the numbers.
This really rings true for me, Dana, because obviously working in recruitment, diversity, is high on the agenda, and I see far too often businesses that are looking at a tick box exercise. And actually, if people don't feel like they belong, then all you're going to get in a business is that churn of staff. So it just doesn't work. So working on the inclusion part first, absolutely, 100% agree with you. And I can see other people in the chat box are as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Eloise. Okay, what's my number 3 thing? It's representation, okay? I think we downplay the importance of representation. And to explain to you what I mean by this, I'm going to tell you a pre-pandemic story about a client of mine. They are very big in the intelligence and cyber space, and they had an issue with recruiting women. And so they actually hired me to find out why they had that issue. And as part of the work, I spoke to female staff members or female identifying staff members who had left. But also in the end, I went to their target universities to speak to some of the students who they were hoping would apply and who actually were applying for competitor firms, but not for this firm, or accepting the offer from this firm, but then when they did get the offer from if the firm offered first, but then if they did get an offer from a competing firm, deciding to take that offer instead. So they had a lot of that happening, where like partway through it would look like the numbers were good, but then they had like people dropping out because they got competing offers from other companies. And there was one resounding answer from all of the students, because remember, they don't really know what the culture of that organization is. They can't truly know because they don't work there. And so they were making their decisions based on something else. And what they were basing it on is that there were no female senior leaders at that firm. So what I'm saying to you is they could not see themselves in the firm. They could not see themselves rising through the ranks of the firm, and they were questioning whether or not there was space for them. But in the other firms that they were applying to, they could see themselves reflected within the makeup of the organization beyond just the more junior levels of the staff. And I think representation is so important, and it really does matter. And if you want people to be able to feel included, that feeling of being the only one of you is something that we have to work on being able to overcome. So I've put that on the list because I keep hearing it over and over, and I hear it a lot now from younger people. And so it's surprising me less, but like people who are looking for jobs now, it always amazes me how much it matters. And it always amazes me how much I hear of people going to LinkedIn profiles for a company and looking to see all of the employees who work there to see if they can see themselves before deciding whether they want to apply or not. It's mattering more and more. And so it's something that I think we should keep an eye on.
Definitely.
The fourth one is about honesty and truth. So in some ways, I see my job as being a truth teller or a detective in a way to find out answers. And people pay me to tell them answers. And then sometimes when I do, they get really cross with me. And I mean, really, really cross with me. It's an occupational hazard because they start off wanting to hear the truth. And then when they see it, supported by data, of course, they are unwilling to be confronted with that vision of themselves. And I understand as human beings, it's human nature to be defensive. I hear it. And when we hear or see things about ourselves that we don't like, it is difficult. But I mean, you've spent this money to find out the answers. Just because you don't like the answer doesn't mean that you get, as Rhiannon has beautifully said, the alternative truth, right? There's no alternative truth. There just is the truth. And I think we have to be willing to hold that mirror up to ourselves and really look and take action based on what we see and what we hear. And just the frequency with which this is happening. And usually clients do come back after and say, look, we're sorry, we've had time to look it through. But usually the initial reaction is never happened, not here, this is totally untrue, everyone's made it up, that kind of thing. I think, we have to be more willing to confront some of the truths about ourselves and organizations. The fifth one is about internal and external lenses. And I'm going to give an example to say what I mean. There are some organizations who public facing seem to be all about inclusion and diversity. So they will ask their suppliers to go through a rigorous process to prove that they are diverse and inclusive before they hire them. They will send out the most diverse teams to pitch and bid for work. They're publishing reports about how you should be when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And then you close the door. And what is happening inside the organization is the complete opposite of everything that they are touting in the outside world. The other side of that is that internally, beautiful culture. People feel welcome, they feel included, happy to work, 10 best places to work, whatever. But then on the supplier side of things, the external facing side of things, people aren't feeling it. So like it's not coming through in the solutions that you offer, in the way that you portray yourself, the way you speak, the way you pitch, the way you talk. And so I think the journey toward inclusion is an easier one when, and gosh, easier is not even the word. It's a more holistic one where it threads through both the service that you deliver, but also the lived experience within the organization. And I think it has to be both. And I think you might choose a place where it starts, but ultimately the work should inform each other. So the stuff that you're doing in the world should reflect diversity and inclusion, but also the way that you live at home should reflect diversity and inclusion. I think it has to be the things in partnership, and too many times it's like an either or scenario. So my sixth one is about options for learning beyond the tick box. What am I talking about? You join a new company and the first thing you have to do is complete an e-learning about diversity and inclusion and how important it is. And then you will complete that e-learning again next year when this year's one has expired, and you have to refresh that knowledge. And in between it, you might have like one all staff meeting where it's mentioned, and then that's the end. So that's one. Or take me back, or sometimes I get clients who say, Dana, we've thought really hard about this and we've decided what our next steps are. Let's do a 2-hour unconscious bias session. And I'm like, okay, great. And then, right? Because I'm not saying no to our unconscious bias session, but I am saying yes and, okay? So I feel like we're taking a scattergun approach to learning in this space is the first thing. And I think we could be more deliberate about it and put out a forward plan. A forward plan that is different for each organization because it's based on where people actually are within your specific context and not on here's a cool thing that Twitter did in 2020. But also, I think that sometimes we forget that even in this space, there are multiple ways to learn. Why is it always a book? Some people do not have time to read multiple books cover to cover about D&I. I would love it if they did, but people have stuff going on. They have lives and we have so many more things, right? There's webinars, there's on conferences. Sometimes people also don't feel great about participating in a session. So what are you planning that would just allow people to sit down, shut up for an hour if they want to, and just take in some core messaging? Like, where is the blending? Why can't we have all the things? Some e-learning, some book club, some social learning, some webinars. Like, why is it always one thing? I'm getting annoyed. I'm sorry, I'm going to calm down now. But this is one of my biggest bugbears about the landscape. Everyone takes a picture of a book and they put it on Instagram and Twitter and they're like, here's what I'm reading now. Or even better, it's a stack of books on an artsy background and it's like my summer reading. What the hell? There are other ways to do this, and we have to normalize those ways. Sometimes I learn more from a 30-minute scroll of Insta or Twitter than I might like reading a whole book. And we have to let people know that it's okay to do other things.
Absolutely agree. And take a breath.
Okay. Number 7 is holding each other accountable. So I started off by talking about politeness in organizations. No one wants to tell anyone when they do something wrong. But lately I've been finding that cultures where it's okay to speak up and hold each other accountable have been managing to bring about change a lot faster than ones who don't. So there's one particular client I work with. They're absolutely adorable. They have an abbreviation that they use with each other, and it's called BB for bad bias. Right? So if they hear someone saying something that's biased in a negative way, they literally say BB to each other. And it's a call out, but it's a little bit funny. No one outside of the organization has to know what it is. But most importantly, it's not finger pointy, like you just said this, I hate this. It's like a little internal mechanism that they have to hold each other accountable. And it works for them. And quite frankly, it's brilliant. And I wish I had thought about it myself. I love how they use it. That might not work in your context. There's one other firm that I work with that went for the zero tolerance approach among their senior leadership team. And what they did was, it was like no words. Okay, so they had a very toxic masculine culture, the kind where you would play shag, marry, and kill with your about your co-workers within their earshot, that kind of place. And so what we agreed with the senior leaders and directors, y'all are laughing, but this is a true story. What we agreed is that when stuff like that was happening and it was heard, whether it was in the pub or in the office or whatever, the most senior person would just say, that's unacceptable, and then get up and walk away. So you don't get my attention if you're saying stuff that is inappropriate. And it wouldn't be more than that. It was literally just, this is unacceptable. And then that person would go somewhere else, as in, it is so distasteful for me that I will not stay here and say it. And initially, it was just the directors who were doing it. Within 2 weeks, we had senior managers doing it, and then managers. And it was like this whole snowball of things that started from the top, them holding each other accountable to certain behaviors. And I think if we are doing this work, we have to be brave enough to do that.
Definitely. The
8th one is about consequences. Right. By this, I mean, lots of times I go into organizations and people tell me things because I'm the neutral ears and it's finally a chance to get something off their chest. And I say to them, why didn't you report it? And they say, there's no point in reporting it. Nothing is going to get done. Everyone knows about this person or this situation or this whatever that's going on, but no one does anything about it. And that always makes me really, really sad. And I think we have to be willing to have really clear consequences and implement those consequences. It's this whole thing about justice being seen to be done. And where that isn't happening, people don't step up. They don't report. They don't say anything because they think nothing is going to come about as a result of raising this issue because there have never been any consequences. I mean, sometimes there are like 20 odd reports of stuff against the same person. And then when I go in and I say, look, what are we doing about this?
Nothing.
Nothing. How can anyone ever step up to try and create change in that kind of environment where nothing is being done? Just saying. Okay, knowing the numbers, I put as number 9. And by this, I am not talking about like clear-cut targets. Let's have our gender base be 50-50. I'm not talking about that, actually. What I'm talking about is knowing where you are. And this goes back to truth. How can you know where you are on your journey if you've achieved anything over time, if you don't even know what your starting point is? You can't. How can you know? How can you track what you've been doing? Seriously, if you don't know where you are? And how do you send a message that you're committed to this if you don't at least set some baseline objectives, right? And an objective could be something as simple as in the Pulse survey or whatever employee survey that you're running, we want to take the answer for this above a certain percentage beyond where it is now. It could be as simple as that. Or we want to reduce the number of complaints in a year. Like, let's get creative about the metrics that we use. Not everything has to be so intense, right? But let's start somewhere and let's publicize what those objectives are and the way that we're going to measure them is what I would say. Like, know where you are, because if you don't know where you are, you can't tell where you're going to. And so the last one is grace and kindness. So I mentioned at the beginning that I started this work in a space where it was okay to make mistakes then because we were all figuring it out as we go along. And I think that no one is perfect, not even me. I don't write on any of my social medias or anywhere that I am an expert in D&I. I think it is really difficult to make that claim about yourself in a space that is always evolving. So I would say I specialize in this area, but I think we have to take that expert terminology away. And I think we have to do more to let people know that it's okay to make a mistake. But what's important is that when you make a mistake, you accept it without being defensive. You strive to do better the next time and not do that mistake again. But also that you forgive yourself. I feel like there's a trend happening now of people publicly beating themselves up and shaming themselves about the mistakes that they made. They made a mistake, they got to write a whole blog post about it, they got to tweet about it, put themselves up to the internet of shame, right? We also have to just let each other know that it is okay not to be perfect. Right? And that nobody can really be expected to be perfect in this space. And so I say to companies as well, look, if someone does something once, we shouldn't be having an HR report for that one, unless it's something really egregious and horrible, right? But even so, can we not give people a chance to correct their mistakes, to understand what they've done wrong? I feel like we just go so hardcore now. You say one wrong thing and then everyone is like, right? I just feel like we need to be a little bit more gentle with each other and a little more kind in general in the space, because everyone is still learning. I am still learning as well, and this is my job. We are all learning, and I think we need to be more gracious with each other in that space. So there we go. 10. That's the 10, Eloise.
Excellent. Rhiannon's asked a question before I go on to my next question. She said, with 10 ingredients, which one do we start with?
So the answer to that depends on where you are as an organization. So if you already have the senior leadership stuff nailed, it won't be that one, right? I think you choose the thing that's going to make the biggest impact immediately. So that's always my answer, because I don't know if you've noticed, but people are a bit impatient when it comes to change. They like to see stuff being done, and there's this whole sense of instant and nowness. And so I think if you're starting off on your journey, why aren't we open about giving people a little bit of now? So if you see something on the list that you can action pretty swiftly and give people that sense of now, I would go for it. Also, if you see something on the list that you know is a big deal within your context and could legitimately make a massive change in the way that people see and experience the organization, go for that one. But it depends on your context. I hope that helped. I'm seeing you nodding a bit. Okay.
And Joanne's asked a question as well, and I will come on to my next question. How do we pick the truly diverse and inclusive companies to work for? So, as you previously said, so many display the right things
Absolutely.
externally, but internally the environment isn't.
So I always advise starting your search on Glassdoor. That the power of anonymity gives people the freedom to be honest in a way that they can't in other places. And it's also a channel that isn't controlled by the company itself. So I would start with looking there. Also, I think that in some ways, yes, the organizations can put out the big glossy, but there will be things that they can't really hide. So I look up organizations, and I look, in Google, if you search for a company, their own stuff is going to come up first. But if you click the news tab to the top, you can see things that have been written about them. And you can also type the company name in Twitter and see if anyone is saying anything about them as well. So back channels are really good to be able to figure some of that stuff out. Also, if you look on LinkedIn, you might see connections who know someone who works there. That's a good way to find out as well. But you need the back channels to be able to figure things out like that.
Brilliant. Great advice. And then, Dana, what's HR's role in all of this?
A lot. So
what should we be doing?
Which is the whole point of this talk, right? So look, I know there's lots of debate going on about, is L&D part of HR, is D&I part of HR, and every company has different reporting lines and so on. But I love it when I go into organizations and HR is the standard bearer across the organizations. That always makes me feel like the organization is in a really powerful position itself. I think there are small things that make a difference. For example, HR actually showing up to some of the training things or things happening within the organization and participating themselves. So not just organizing and taking a back seat to it, but actually doing the do, walking the walk, I think is really important. HR getting support for senior leadership and helping them to step up. I think lots of times we take a one lens approach at this, which is let's upskill the team and the staff, and we forget about upskilling the people who are leading. I think HR can help carry about that message. I talked about consequences. HR have a role to play there as well, supported within other structures within the organization. But for me, grace and kindness is also a huge HR thing as well. And to some degree, and y'all might disagree with me, but I think that this is where it starts. Just kindness in the role, and when things do come up, I think, when people get smacked down for doing something wrong, and it's the first time that they've done it or whatever, and there's like a really hard line, it doesn't always augur well. So having that kind of sensitivity to what is needed and being prepared to approach things with a little bit of kindness, I think matters. But also the holding people accountable and being willing to talk about stuff openly is also a place where HR can show up. HR gets involved in lots of meetings across various places in the organization, from recruitment to talent to performance to pay, being able to call out like some of those gaps that are showing up and having a lens on those things from a diversity and inclusion perspective, for me, is really important.
Fabulous. Fabulous. That's great, Dana. Thank you. Has anybody got any questions that they want to ask Dana? So what are the best ways to get a D&I role of your...
If your background isn't HR.
Yeah.
So my background isn't HR, but I fell into it accidentally. I think so. In the last year, I have been mentoring someone who is very passionate about D&I and really wanted to get a role in the space, but actually wasn't at that point doing much work in the field itself. And in a year, she took up volunteering activities in D&I to boost her CV. She also signed up to get some mentoring on it with me, and she found an entry-level role in the end to be able to move across. But the reason why she got the work is that she was able to show things that she had done in the time, even though her core role wasn't in inclusion. She also, I think, did a really brilliant piece of branding, which was she started commenting and sharing things related to inclusion on LinkedIn. So if you landed on her profile, all of the stuff that you would see on top would be stuff that's related to inclusion. And she showed that she was really passionate about it. She changed her headline to say whatever her job was, but who is passionate about working in inclusion. And so she rebranded herself to be able to take the next step into the role. So things like that you might want to think about. And I don't think that you necessarily have to have always an HR background to be able to step in and work on D&I, but you might have to be prepared to work your way up to where you are. Demonstrated knowledge is really good, though.
Great, Dana. Thank you. And Joanne says if you need a new mentee.
Yeah, totally. Message me.
Excellent. Well, I will. I'll share there will be a recording that we send out to everybody, and when I do that, I will share Dana's contact details. But you can obviously find her very quickly on LinkedIn.
Or anywhere, literally type in diversity Dana. It's exactly the same across all of the platforms, and you will be able to find me.
Brilliant. There's another question, Dana, if that's okay. Catherine's asked, any strategies for helping to change the mindset in senior management that all the D&I work should be done by the volunteers in the business?
I'm going to try and stay calm while I answer this, Catherine, because this is another one of those things that gets my blood going, right? So the first thing is, are the volunteers even being given space to do this in addition to their own roles? Because there's this whole thing about burning out, especially when it comes to work in inclusion, which is incredibly emotive, right? It takes an emotional toll sometimes to do this work, especially if you haven't been building in the self-care mechanisms over time, which many people don't know how to do to begin with, right? So I think making it clear that you can only get so far before you have some kind of dedicated resource. And I think someone has to tell them And I think someone has to show them as well. So with one of the companies, we outlined all of the things that were achieved in a year, and then we showed them what could have been achieved if there was dedicated resource. We actually did a mapping where the people who were doing the work came together and spoke about what their knowledge gaps were, things that they were missing, things that they were worried about from being volunteers in the space. And they were really open and honest about it with senior management. And that propelled them to take some action, because there were quite some big gaps, which, I mean, they're volunteers, obviously. They're doing the best that they can, but they maybe don't have specialist knowledge. And so showing them what the landscape could be and really highlighting what some of the existing gaps are is a strategy that might be useful.
Great, thank you. Because that's the thing is, isn't it? If you don't get the senior management team on board, you said, that's one of the most important things, and sometimes actually the senior management team can be part of the issue.
Absolutely.
So, Dana, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been a really informative and fun session. So I'm sure on behalf of everybody, thank you for joining us, and everybody who's joined us, thank you for being here. Hope you've enjoyed the afternoon. Like I said, a recording will be sent out early next week with Dana's contact details. I know she's happy to talk to anybody that's got any questions or wants any assistance with anything. And in the future, if you've got any topics that you would like us to cover, any other sessions that you would like to be run, please feel free to contact me directly. But thank you, and we will see you all very soon. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.